Everybody lies. These two words make up the philosophy of one Dr. Gregory House, head of the Department of Diagnostic Medicine at Princeton Plainsboro Teaching Hospital. Within the show House M.D., Greg House is one of the most accomplished physicians in the entire world. When other doctors admit defeat, throw their hands up and say, "We don't know what's wrong with them," it's on House's desk where those cases end up. House's job is to look at the clues, piece together what's wrong with his patient, and no matter what, solve the diagnosis. It's up to him and his 3 team members: Cameron, a specialist in the body's immune system; Chase, a specialist in intensive care; and Foreman, who's black. He's also a really good neurologist. Then there's House's best friend James Wilson, who's an oncologist, and everything House does has to answer to the hospital's extremely attractive and equally smart Dean of Medicine, Dr. Lisa Cuddy. Here's the thing about Greg House though, he's absolutely a genius. It's just that his methods are a little untraditional? Because House believes everybody lies, that means he doesn't trust his patients either. He'll run every test possible and even go as far as to have his doctors break into the patient's home to look for clues. Because of this, he constantly gets into fights with Cuddy, his co-workers, and even the law. Both because House doesn't want to do things properly because it's slow, and also because House doesn't respect authority. All he respects is results. He'll break any rule, moral, ethical, social, legal, if he thinks it'll help him get to the bottom of a mystery. But underneath all of this, the show paints a portrait of House as a character that's as deeply flawed as the patients he's treating. Way before the show starts, House suffers an infarction that leaves him permanently paralyzed in his right leg. Because of this, House is in continuous pain at all times of the day, and a huge chunk of the first half of the show is about House slowly developing an addiction to a painkiller, Vicodin. House is kind of an infamous character because of this, specifically because of the blend of how charismatic and talented he is.
Is it still illegal to perform an autopsy on a living person?
Are you high?
Despite having an incredibly off-putting personality.
Go check out the hood, dog.
It's so much fun to see House on screen, partly because of the way Hugh Laurie plays him, but also because it's just cool to see someone really good at their job, doing their job. But he also constantly insults and talks down to everyone around him, and it's not clear how serious he is. Like, he does it to Cuddy all the time, but that's because he's attracted to her. But he also does it to his best friend Wilson, and actually that's because he's attracted to him too. Huh. That looks familiar. In fact, House the character is generally racist and sexist to everyone, which is extra funny because the show was pretty progressive compared to what was actually on American TV in the 2000s.
Silence!
Carlos Mencia, jump scare. Basically, I would want House as my doctor, but I wouldn't want him as a friend. You know what I'm saying? He's been described with pretty much every negative adjective that's possible. He's childish, he's arrogant, he hates meeting his patients, he's irresponsible, he's lazy, he's cynical, he's pessimistic, he has a massive ego, he has unresolved parental problems, he's untrustworthy, and is, generally kind of a sociopath. He also doesn't dress like a doctor either, which is why it's so interesting that when House was on the air, it wasn't just a popular show, it was literally the most popular show in the entire world. At least for 1 year. In 2008, more than 81.8 million people across 66 countries watched House. Do you know how big it must have been purely for it to be available in 66 countries? So it wasn't just the case that House was a good show, which to be clear, it is, it's a fantastic show. But it also means that there must have been something going on inside House that managed to transcend cultural borders and resonate across an entire place as divided as the United States. And the whole thing ran for 8 seasons, from 2004 till 2012. Every episode of the show says it was created by David Shaw and executive produced by 2 veterans of the film industry. Paul Attanasio, who wrote one of my favorite movies ever by the way, Quiz Show, and the other was Brian. Whoa! Now, House's profession, diagnostic medicine, is not an exact science. In fact, it literally is not a science. House's department is unique in that it doesn't exist in the real world, which is something the show admits multiple times. Specific departments don't exist to solve what's wrong with people, because a general physician, the local guy you go to see first when you're sick, has to try diagnose you so they can help you. And if they've got no idea, they'll recommend you to a specialist. But here's the thing, a specialist just looks for what they specialize in. A cardiologist will scan for a heart disease, a neurologist will dig around in your nervous system, and an immunologist will check your immunities. What makes House such an incredible doctor is that while he's specialized in studying kidneys and infectious diseases, he also seems to know everything. The guy will pick up problems with the brain, lungs, hormones, like he put them there in the first place. Actually, sometimes he did put them there in the first place. If there's one thing I've learnt by watching this show, it's that doctors are essentially meat engineers. House is such a deceptively simple show because while it seems relatively straightforward, underneath that, the show's a well-oiled machine with so many invisible, complex moving parts. And by the end, House starts to collapse under the weight of what it's created. But that's a long way away. These are the good times. So why does House's department exist? Pretty much entirely for the sake of the show. See, when House says everybody lies, he's not just talking about his patients, he's also talking about the show itself. And the more I started to follow these lines of thought, I asked myself, what type of show is House? If you've never seen an episode of House, you might be surprised to learn that as much as it has to do with the world of medicine, House owes equally as much to detective fiction. In 2003, Paul Attanasio was looking to executive produce a new program on TV. He knew the network NBC wanted a procedural, and it was his idea to merge that detective style of storytelling with the world of medicine. When I say procedural, by the way, all I mean is a show that's focused on the act of following procedure. The characters get presented with a problem, they investigate it, and it gets resolved, all within the same episode. It's usually cops solving crimes, which is already a pretty out there idea. But a procedural doesn't have to be about cops either. It could follow a lawyer trying to prove his client's innocent. But in the case of House, instead of catching criminals, it's about catching illnesses. Not like getting sick, but like, you get what I'm trying to say. And to be blunt, Attanasio had struck gold with his idea. He was taking two of the most popular genres of television and combining them together in a way nobody else really had. According to David Shaw, it really was that cynical. The New York Times Magazine has a medical diagnosis column written by Lisa Sanders. Paul read that and said, "Hey, that's a good idea for a series. It wasn't much more involved than that." I took that idea, developed the characters, and wrote the script. And Lisa Sanders is now a consultant on the show. House was a deliberate fusion of two of the biggest shows on TV, the procedural and the medical drama. Let's break those down a little. Procedurals are some of the most popular programs in US television history. In fact, they're some of the first programs in US television history. And instead of coming from literature, the procedural has its roots in radio. Because at least for the first half of the 20th century, radio was the most popular form of entertainment. In 1935, J. Edgar Hoover, the then director and recent founder of the FBI, was looking for a propaganda tool to hype up his new department. And as Hoover prowled around his lair, a devilish idea grasped his narrow, bigoted mind. What if he were to use the radio drama to spin positive stories around his recruits? Hoover's idea was to develop a new radio show called G-Men. It started in 1935 and was so unpopular that it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page today. The premise of G-Men was taking real cases from the FBI and dressing them up so they were palatable for a generic middle-class audience. Hoover wanted the show to focus on presenting the FBI as a scientific, professional organization, and therefore, as much as he could, he worked to de-emphasize the use of guns, violence, and automobile chases. Every episode had to go through FBI approval, and Hoover wanted to downplay the agents' personalities because he wanted the organization to be the central force of the show. And by doing this, he created an extremely boring show that was cancelled after 13 episodes. But the producer of G-Men, Phillips H. Lord, knew people wanted something with action, and with Hoover gone, he could actually make it, and his show did gangbusters, because it was called gangbusters. It was an overnight success and ran for just under 20 years on the radio, and eventually got turned into a movie and TV show. The real major hit on TV was something called Dragnet, which started in 1949 as a radio show for NBC, but only 2 years later, it had grown into a full TV show. And entertainment worked differently back then. Even though Dragnet was on TV, they kept running the radio show. And 3 years after that, Dragnet got adapted into a film. They used to turn radio shows into films at one point, and America's basically kept making procedurals ever since. Columbo, Miami Vice, Law & Order. But because the procedural has its roots in adapting FBI case files on the radio, it was designed from the ground up to give you a complete story every episode. You can watch a procedural out of order because the central case will get set up, explored, and resolved all within the hour. And since the way television is broadcasted out is far more similar to radio than movies, the procedural format fit more naturally on TV. And in House, the format's pretty much the same. Him and his team take on one major case every episode. But since the show was on Fox, the general structure was changed to work around commercial breaks. So this is how an episode of House plays out. It opens with an unrelated group of people that you've never seen before going about their day. Maybe they're at a lacrosse game or they're a teacher, and when you least expect it, something goes wrong, their body fails, and then the intro plays. The rest of the episode is split into 4 chapters, each ending whenever an advert would play on TV, basically. Act 1 is House taking on the case, presenting it to his team, and then they start evaluating how sick the patient really is. Act 2 is they start treatment on the patient, their treatment ends up being completely wrong, and the patient gets worse. House also takes some Vicodin. Act 3, the patient gets way more worse and is borderline dying, but House can't work out what the solution is. And then Act 4, House gets an idea out of nowhere, figures out what's wrong with the patient, and then if he has time left over, he'll cure them. Now, if that's true, which it is because I wrote it, I've just explained the basic story beats of every single episode of House to you within 1 minute, and I want to be very clear about what I'm going to say next. Despite knowing how every episode is going to play out from the very first second, House is one of the most entertaining things I've ever seen. Because there's another specific long-running television genre that House is a part of, the medical drama. When I call House a drama, you know what I mean, right? Like, it's impossible to pin it down exactly, but you know one when you see it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, House is a show that, while it makes a lot of jokes, it does take itself seriously when it needs to, and it has real characters and relationships that develop over time. As creative as House is, medical TV shows aren't anything new. When House first started, there were 11 other medical dramas on the air. In 2009, ABC's primetime lineup had 3 big shows: Scrubs, Grey's Anatomy, and Private Practice. One of the most popular shows of all time, MASH, is literally about a group of surgeons. And we're not even talking about how many channels or streaming services show these programs after they finish airing the first time. In his book Playing Doctor, Joseph Turow puts together a little history on the type of medical shows that eventually paved the way for something like House to exist. Early medical shows weren't very realistic and tended to focus a lot more on the patient.
Now, wait a minute, Angie. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's no reason for me to stay tonight.
What the hell was this guy's problem? But when MASH arrived on the scene, it was so big and so beloved, it started to mark a shift in the way these dramas approach the life of doctors. MASH's whole appeal was that it focused less on the patients and far more on the lives of the physicians and nurses treating them. The stress that came with their jobs and the personal things they had to sacrifice. MASH humanized them in a way medical dramas really hadn't before. But if MASH moved the needle, there was another show that straight up slammed on the accelerator: ER. From 1994 till 2009, 15 different seasons of ER were produced. Here's how David Foster, a real physician who wrote for House M.D, talked about ER. Part of the genius of ER was really in humanizing the doctors. They were very real. They were just good people trying to do their best in difficult circumstances. I think it changed the audience's perspective from that of the patient to the audience being with the doctor. You know, some people use the phrase the golden age of television. They mean that era from the 2000s to like a couple of years ago, where basically every American channel had a high quality show that looked like a film and had really good writing. There's a writer called Robert Thomsen who argued in a book from 1996 that this was a new type of TV, and he called it quality TV. Quality TV was defined by a bunch of things, but here's just a couple of them. It was produced by people who worked in more respectable fields like film, like David Lynch with Twin Peaks. The shows didn't have to be serialized, but they would remember things. Characters would change and grow over time, for example. And quality TV created a new genre by mixing together existing old ones. I want to point out one thing about what Thomsen's saying. He wasn't arguing that these types of shows are better than everything else. All he was saying was they couldn't fit within the existing definition of TV, so they had to be something else. And the thing about Thomsen's book is that it was really written before the modern golden age of TV kicked off. The shows he was looking at were shows from the 80s like Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere. Shows that did really well with critics but didn't do Iron Man numbers at the time. They had small but loyal audiences, which is crazy because St. Elsewhere literally has the greatest actor of all time. It's fair to say the shows that came out of this period are probably some of the most influential TV ever made. But what's crazy is, Thomsen's definition still works today. Pretty much everything he says applies to House. Most people think The Sopranos kicked off the modern golden age, and it was hugely important, but as Thomsen's book shows, this was a dam that was getting ready to burst since the early 80s. I think it's fair to say though, the spark that set off the wider explosion and fired the starting pistol for every network to scramble after their own show, that was ER. ER predates The Sopranos by like 5 years. I mean, ER was so popular it created George Clooney. That was his first big role. Look, if you still don't believe me, just look at how TV looked before and then after ER came out. The top-rated primetime TV drama in 1993 was Murder, She Wrote. Here's an episode from that year that's been cleaned up for modern screens. It looks okay, I guess. Anyway, here's how the first episode of ER looks. We get cameras following characters through their workplace. We see shots from the perspective of the patient, people running around. If there's something you like about this modern style of TV, it probably came from ER. So when people say, oh, Lost is when TV shows started looking good, or fucking, I don't know, White Lotus or something. No, it wasn't. It was ER. Put some respect on its name. Basically, what I'm saying is, without medical dramas, there'd be no Breaking Bad or Mad Men. That type of drama on TV that just lets you sit with the characters and breathe in their lives, that is ER. By the time the trend of highly produced medical shows exploring doctors' lives gets to House, the show is almost entirely about the doctors' personal lives. Now you might say, that's not true, it's all about the patients. It's about figuring out what's wrong with them. But I'd like to point out, the show's called House. It's not called the most f***ed medical department on earth. Every single thing in the show's DNA, from its basic structure to its name, is in some way a reflection of Greg House and the other doctors at PPTH. See, while House has one major case to solve in every episode, in between, he also has to do clinic duty. Essentially, because PPTH is a teaching hospital, it has a walk-in clinic run by the faculty. Anyone can come in, it costs no money, and an assigned doctor will spend the time with you to diagnose an illness. It's a great medical idea, but it's an even better writing one. House always hates doing clinic duty because he thinks it isn't important. It's usually someone with the flu or some sort of allergic reaction, and all he wants to do is focus on more extreme cases. But it serves two important functions. The first one is that it helps him solve the bigger case. For example, in the second episode of the show, one of the clinic duty cases House takes is a mother who's never vaccinated her daughter, because she thinks the natural immunity in breast milk will protect her. But House tells her that protection only lasts for the first 6 months of a baby's life, and not vaccinating them could lead to them dying. Fast forward to the end of the episode, it turns out the major patient House was investigating is actually adopted, and his birth mother never got vaccinated. So as a baby, he got exposed to measles, and the disease laid dormant in his brain. Not only does the earlier patient give House the idea of how to solve the case, but it also explains the basic science behind the reveal to us, the people watching the show, before it actually happens. The clinic case lets us understand the bigger procedural case. But clinic duty serves another important purpose as well. In the same episode, House gets a patient with an infected leg, but when he looks at his address, he realizes the guy lives 70 miles away from PPTH. And from that information, the fact this guy didn't visit a physician closer to him, House works out that this guy sues doctors and takes money from hospitals, but he chooses to treat him anyway, because that's the right thing to do. Skip to the end of the episode, you won't believe this, the guy comes back and tries to sue House, and without blinking, House tells him he has an STD. Patient's like, no I don't, and then House says, well, I think you do, and I'm gonna have to tell the state, and they're gonna have to contact your wife. You could easily prove me wrong by getting a doctor to run a test for you though. This is the second type of clinic duty case, a case that tells us more about House as a character. You think he's helping this guy, but it turns out House trusts him even less than we do. And also that House has a weird sense of justice in him. He feels like he needs to personally get involved to teach this guy a lesson. He can't just let things go. It's a pretty fun way to learn about him while still doing some detective work. Hey, speaking of which, do you remember when I was talking about that 4-chapter procedural act structure earlier? In between all of that procedural work, the show weaves in this character drama. Maybe we see House's team doesn't get along well. Maybe there's stuff going wrong in their personal lives. But before exploring any of that can get boring, House always cuts back to the procedural. And when the procedural starts to get boring, it cuts back to the drama. It's pretty genius because it gives House a lot of natural momentum. It's telling 2 stories at the same time. The pacing's always really good because of it. And both the procedural and the medical drama have a lot of natural storytelling already built into them. They both follow ordinary people with extraordinary jobs that often deal with life and death circumstances. There's a lot of tension in both jobs as well, like they're constantly battling against time. Either the patient will die or the criminal gets away. And the thing is, you don't need to explain a lot about how the show works either. Everybody knows what a doctor's job is. Say you're browsing through channels on your TV and you've never heard of House, and you just flick it on. The first thing you see is that it's in the middle of a scene in a hospital with a doctor standing by a patient's bed. Before anyone said anything, you've already mentally processed a lot of the story. One person's sick, it's someone else's job to get them better, and you instantly understand the relationship between the two of them. In fact, you probably also understand that the hospital's a workplace. It must have a cafeteria, a break room, toilets, other doctors, vending machines, and you could just go on like this forever. All of this is immediately obvious to you just from a single shot of House. Most shows don't have this. They have to spend ages telling you why Walter White wants to cook meth, or why Tony Soprano hates his wife. It's because he secretly hates himself. House doesn't need to spend any time explaining how a doctor works, so when an episode starts, it can just get straight to the drama, or the case. And when you have like 40 minutes to tell your story, because Fox really wants to advertise the Bullet Express for the other 20,
cheesecake.
Being able to skip explaining why you should care about what's happening helps a lot. But you might have noticed a contradiction in what I've been saying. One half of House is the procedural, a format designed to give you a complete solved mystery in every episode. The other half is a medical drama, a format designed around developing characters and relationships to give you a story over multiple episodes. How can it be both at the exact same time? That's because House is ripping off a third thing, CSI, crime scene investigation. In fact, according to David Shaw, the original pitch for House was as a CSI type thing. Now you might be wondering, why CSI? I thought that was that show they put on in the middle of the day when people are at work. Well, 4 years before House started, the first episode of CSI aired, and it immediately, I'm talking immediately, became one of the most popular TV shows ever. They greenlit a spin-off in the middle of season 2. Do you remember earlier when I said House was the most watched show in the world in 2008? Well, guess what the most watched show in the world was in 2005, 6, 7, 9, 11, and 15. And if you expand it a bit in some other years, the most popular show in the world was NCIS, which, as everyone knows, is CSI for dyslexic people. Yeah, CSI was huge, and House actually borrows quite a lot from it. That same basic structure of opening with a random scene and then going between the mystery and the characters, CSI did that first. Here's how Entertainment Weekly described the appeal of CSI in 2002, 2 years before House's first episode. The reason for CSI's success is that it combines a few time-tested TV elements in a fresh way. Every episode presents a murder case and a group of lovable heroes armed with cool, high-tech gadgets who do the sleuthing and wrap things up in an hour. CSI didn't follow cops. It followed people who do their jobs, crime scene investigators, people who go to the scene of the crime, bag evidence, and then use science to catch the criminal. A common theme in CSI is that you can't trust people, only evidence. In fact, the first episode of CSI has an exchange where they say that,
concentrate on what cannot lie, the evidence.
In fact, it feels like every episode has an exchange where they say that. That's House. That's House's whole thing. Everybody lies.
Everybody lies.
As Dr. House likes to say, everybody lies.
Everybody lies, except politicians?
It's his thing so much, I started this video by saying it. So, case closed, right? House is CSI, the end. But as I was writing this, I started to remember something Thomsen said about quality TV. Quality TV creates a new genre by mixing old existing ones. And that means House can't just be CSI either. A big theme of the show is that the crime scene investigators can't interfere with the investigation. They have to arrest morally good people if the evidence tells them they're guilty. You see them solve crimes using science and peeling apart clues and doing real detective work by the book. House is the opposite. He'll violate every single rule possible, including going against whatever the patient wants, if he thinks it'll help him solve the case. And the more I started to think about this, the less sense any of it made. How can House be a procedural? He doesn't follow procedures. That's what makes House, House. Case not closed. You still have to watch the rest of the video. So that's why House is so difficult to talk about, because while it exists in the legacy of the medical drama, the procedural, and CSI, it isn't just shamelessly copying them either. It's responding to them. It's building off the ideas they started. Just look at how they do photos for House. Why are you so freaky, Craig? Whoa, slow down, House. The last doctor to go into a public bathroom like that got banned off Twitch. One of the most common facts that people like to share about House M.D. is that the show is based on the stories of Sherlock Holmes. And on the surface, that kind of makes sense. House, Holmes, he's best friends with a doctor called Wilson, Watson. House and Sherlock both use drugs recreationally. The patient in the first episode is called Mrs. Adler, like Irene Adler from that one Sherlock story. And also, House lives at 221B Baker Street, which was Sherlock's home address too. But Sherlock lived in the UK, but I guess America also has a place called New England. So, sorry, I'm not supposed to be getting this political this early. Honestly, the only thing they forgot to give House was Sherlock's crazy mind powers. But after spending a few hours using my own mind powers, I asked myself something. Is House an adaptation of Sherlock Holmes? House is definitely about solving a mystery, but he doesn't do it in the same way as Holmes. What makes a Sherlock story is that you're given the exact same clues the characters are. Sherlock makes a deduction based on the same information you and I have. But the impressive part is that Sherlock saw a link in the clues that we didn't as readers, but we totally could have if we looked at it from a different perspective. So, let's do this. Let's actually try to solve a medical case together from an episode of House. If it's like Sherlock, we should be able to do it, right? Here's your patient. He's a young Caucasian male in his late teens to early 20s. Let's call him Patient X. X presents to the emergency room with a litany of symptoms. He has a bad cough, a prominent rash on his torso, but the most striking thing is there's a lot of pain in his abdomen area with no apparent cause. His girlfriend tells the attending that they were both relaxing in bed when suddenly, Patient X collapsed on top of her. The strange thing about this case is that the patient's blood pressure is dangerously low because it isn't responding to any IV fluids. That never happens. You tested his blood count, but there was nothing interesting in it. So naturally, you decide to CT scan his abdomen, but there's no clues inside there either. And on top of that, when X was first admitted to the hospital and you started controlling every single liquid and morsel of food that entered his body, he started to get better, and then he got a lot worse. In the last few hours, he's developed a strong fever and he's experiencing a lot of nausea. You decide 4 minds are better than 1 and go talk to your team. Your neurologist tells you it's a neurological issue, your immune specialist tells you it's an immune issue, and your intensivist tells you it's an intense issue. So which is it? No condition exists that accounts for all 6 of these symptoms. Could be lupus? As you're wondering what it could be, Patient X's condition goes from serious to critical. His blood pressure's entered freefall, there's fluid starting to rise and fill his lungs, and maybe worst of all, his kidneys are shutting down. And as the fluid in his lungs continues to go up and up, his white blood cell count is crawling lower and lower. If you don't solve this soon, this kid is going to be dead in a few hours, and he's going to have to suffer the entire time. So, doctor, here's your 8 symptoms. There's only one problem. No condition can account for all 8 symptoms at the exact same time. You can explain some of them with different theories, but there's nothing in existence that'll explain all 8. Well, that only leaves one question. What's the diagnosis? It's colchicine poisoning. Turns out his pharmacist gave him gout medicine for his cough instead, because the pills look the same. And then someone gave him them in the hospital because they thought he had the flu. What? You didn't get that? Are you an idiot? No, you're just not a doctor. But you could be if you applied yourself for once. See, House absolutely gives you all of the evidence you need to solve one of these medical cases. The diseases themselves are fairly grounded in reality. The timelines are obviously sped up for the sake of TV, and House's department is designed from the ground up to deal with rare cases. But House's writing team did consist of real doctors and they consulted medical experts for each episode. These are real conditions, and they could manifest in this way. There's just one important difference. House gives you the clues to solve a case, but you don't have the tools to make sense of them. Any of us can make the same deductions that Sherlock Holmes does. His are all about looking at clues from a new perspective. But none of us could make the same deductions that House does because we don't have degrees in medicine. Unless you are actually a doctor and you're watching this. Which, first of all, cool, I feel less like a failure now. And secondly, why? Basically, what I'm trying to say is, House M.D. is exceptionally good at making you think you could solve one of these medical cases, but none of us actually could. And the most effective way it breaks down something as complex as medicine and makes it accessible to anyone is by using a single prop that's in every episode. House's whiteboard. There's a type of scene that happens multiple times in each episode of House called a differential diagnosis. It's a type of back and forth logical debate that doctors do use in real life to try to pin down the illnesses someone has. You take the patient's symptoms, zoom out, and start with what everything could be, and then you hack away at possibilities till you're left with the most plausible ones. So say someone's admitted to the hospital, but they don't know what they have. House will ask his team, this guy has a fever, a cough, and a sore throat. Any ideas? And then Chase will say, could be the flu, mate. No, it's super gonorrhea. Idiot. Gulp. That was his Vicodin. And no matter how complicated the cases get, or how simple, the basic process of getting a diagnosis is the same. You take symptoms, you test for things, and you whittle down a list till you've reached the correct answer. House M.D. takes this real medical process and then simplifies it so it can explain medical science to you. Here's the thing though, literally all of the scientific dialogue in these differentials is noise. The show knows you don't understand it. Anything you need to understand goes on the whiteboard. This is the only thing in the room that's talking to you. The whiteboard's important because keeping all of this technical information in your head would be impossible. House's team throw out medical terms so often and don't bother to explain any of them. I don't know what an A&A test is, I don't know what the difference between a CAT scan or a CT is, and I definitely don't know what it means to be a roboplegic wrongocock. But what I do know is whatever those things are, they matter to the people inside this room, and it's their job to know what it means. It's my job to interpret how they feel about it. This is the other big trick House does. You don't need to know what these terms mean. You just need to know if it's going to make the patient recover or get worse. I don't understand what a real doctor's doing either when he's helping me. I just hope he knows what he's doing. The problem with analyzing House more broadly is that it's kind of difficult because the show is just too good at what it's doing. It's condensing a lot of really impressive techniques and executing them at such a high level that it feels invisible while you're watching it. So I think the best way to figure out what House does well is to compare it to something that doesn't do it well. Something about investigating clues and chasing mysteries. That's right, Watson. I'm going to be talking about Watson.
Watson is garbage, and here's why.
Watson is a show that's currently airing on CBS where Morris Chestnut from Boys in the Hood is doing Dr. House stuff. Like, he has his own practice where he chases a new case every episode, but the show is also set in the Sherlock Holmes universe. What a sentence. So he's also John Watson at the same time. He has his own team. They call him a doc tech. Who cares? Does CBS know they made CSI? Like, why does this exist? The first thing I think about every time I look at Watson is that there's just nothing interesting about his visual design. It looks like sludge. All of his team wear the most generic outfits possible, like they just walked off the set off an IKEA advert. House's design, on the other hand, is also incredibly generic, and if this was any other show, you wouldn't be able to pick him out from a lineup of other people. But House knows this, and his generic clothing actually makes him stand out, because everybody else is wearing white lab coats. It's a pretty smart visual way to instantly make it clear that House isn't like other doctors. He doesn't even follow the most basic rule. But it also gives us, as viewers, a guy to actually connect with. Watson is so unrelatable. Like look how ripped Morris Chestnut is. Is that me? Is that supposed to be me? He looks like he's gonna explode out of that shirt if he flexes. I may not have House's intelligence, or his charisma, or his good looks, but you know what I do have? Sneakers. The writing in Watson also really makes you appreciate how much they can cram into an episode of House naturally. Something the show likes to do a lot is use the differential scenes to talk about both the science side of the story and the doctor's personal lives. The way Watson handles this is it just switches between the two. In this scene, there's two plot things going on. Dr. Lubbock's boyfriend was meant to propose to her, but didn't. And they're also talking about this kid who looks like a Kingdom Hearts character. This section of the conversation's about the case.
uncombable hair syndrome.
This section of the conversation's about Dr. Lubbock's personal life.
I didn't ask for a balloon bouquet.
And then when that conversation's over, they just start talking about Roxas again. 3 super cleanly divided sections. House is so much better at doing this. Here, his team is trying to do a differential diagnosis on a patient, but at the same time, Foreman and Cameron are in the middle of a fight. Cameron thinks Foreman stole an article she wrote and published it under his name, but Foreman keeps denying it. And unlike Watson, the way House presents these 2 conversations is by having both at the exact same time. You can tell there's tension between Foreman and Cameron while they're doing the diagnosis.
Sleep is an active process. Reboots the system, restores the brain. Sedatives don't...
The brain is being stressed. We need to relieve that.
But later in the scene, they'll straight up switch between conversations instantly.
Nothing that would cause sleep disturbances. When did you get his article?
The fact we can understand what's happening here with barely any explanation is legit really impressive. And it's equally impressive that for some reason, Watson didn't f***ing steal this. Also, I get they can't make Watson problematic like House is cause things have just changed too much, but that's terrible. What flaws does Watson have? He doesn't drink his protein shake during his anabolic period? He buys some crap whey instead of optimum nutrition? What are we talking about here? Anyway, everybody knows the most problematic thing about House wasn't his behavior, it was the guy who executive produced it. Let's talk about House the guy for a bit. See, when they were coming up with the personality of House, he didn't just need to be a good character, he needed to be one with enough depth that they could plausibly hang an entire show off him, and a video essay. But deep characters aren't perfect and clean people. Often the most interesting and memorable characters are those who have room to grow, inherently flawed people, and calling House a flawed character is an understatement. A lot of people assume that Greg House is really popular because he's so smart and solves everything instantly and puts everybody back in their proper place. But this isn't true. House is frequently incorrect and talks down to other people while being incorrect. He never figures out the case immediately, there'd be no show. Hey, listen. If I wanted to see an arrogant dickhead talk down to people condescendingly while being incorrect, I would just read any Reddit thread. House isn't a good character because he's a sarcastic asshole, he's a good character in spite of it. Let's look at how they first introduce House in the pilot. It opens on a conversation between House and his best friend Wilson, but Wilson's the one leading the conversation, and he's continually trying to encourage House to take a specific case. But every time Wilson tells him why he should take it, House pushes back by deflecting the conversation onto himself.
Female, first seizure 1 month ago, lost the ability to speak.
See that? They all assume that I'm impatient because of this cane.
Before we even get a good look at House's face, we see Wilson's instead. Already, the show's telling us 2 pretty big pieces of info about House. 1, people want things from him, and 2, he doesn't like to give them away. House defines his value as a person on being wanted by others, but not by actually contributing to their lives. I love the opening shot of this scene too, by the way, because it opens with a deliberate comparison. Wilson's introduced holding his medical files, but House is introduced holding his cane. It's a memorable visual prop, but what I like about it is that it's kind of a great metaphor for House as a character. He wants to be able to support himself without accepting anybody else's help to do it. And that attitude causes pretty much every problem House experiences throughout the entire show. From his Vicodin addiction to his personal relationships, House won't ever let himself be vulnerable in front of other people. Something that people say all the time is that House doesn't care about his patients, but I don't think that's true. It's fair to say House loves solving puzzles, and unresolved mysteries do bother him on a deep level. But I think his obsession with medical cases has nothing to do with that. House's secret is that he cares too much. He deliberately distances himself so he can't get too attached to his patient. To be clear, I'm not saying House secretly has a good heart and he really loves everyone. There are a couple flashes of that, but I'm actually saying the opposite. House is a giant coward. As a guy who defines so much of himself by the pain in his leg, House sees his own pain reflected in his patients, and he'll do anything to avoid having to confront that feeling again, including making it go away permanently by curing his patient. It's revealed in a season 1 episode that House lost his leg because of a delayed diagnosis from his doctors. That's why House is obsessed with objectivity, because he never wants anyone else to have to go through what he did. He's an incredibly relatable character because I think all of us have a little bit of House inside us. They take House's ideology to a really big extreme, but we all kind of wrestle with the fact that maybe we're not doing as much as we can to help others. House looks at that feeling from a selfish perspective. It shows him continually helping as much as he can so he can avoid any forced introspection, and the show exaggerates that trait to the point he becomes self-destructive. There's a season 1 episode called Control that I think is really good at revealing the depth of House's character. A super wealthy CEO of a major company gets admitted to PPTH after her legs start failing in the middle of a board meeting, and she specifically requests House to take over her case. After running a few tests and watching a couple of commercial breaks, the team finds out that their patient has severe congestive heart failure, and she'll need a heart transplant in order to live. But when House goes to talk to her about it, he realizes she's strongly bulimic. Nobody else has been able to tell because she hides it out of shame by taking a drug to induce her vomiting. And it's that drug that's been causing the internal muscle damage. When he goes into her room, he goes in with the intent to talk down to her and lecture her. But as he speaks to her, it looks like he changes his mind, and he tells her that in an hour, he has to go in front of the transplant committee and make his case for why she deserves a new heart. But bulimia is classified as a major psychiatric condition, and patients with that label immediately get rejected, so she'll only have a few hours to live. But then he says something else. He says, "Unless I lie to the committee." See, House's rule breaking goes both ways. He isn't just selfish, he has his own moral and ethical code he tries to stick to. But there's one line in this scene that stuck with me since I saw it the first time. The patient asks him why he's doing this, and he says,
I want to know what's right.
if the committee found he lied to them, his medical license would have been suspended, and he'd never be able to practice medicine again, the thing he defines his entire life on. But House is willing to put all of that on the line if the patient tells him she wants to live. It's interesting that House's definition of what's right isn't based on medical ethics or economical ethics. It's based on, does this person deserve another chance? And House desperately wants to believe she does because he sees himself in her. I don't think it's a coincidence they wrote a patient who also has a self-destructive habit and experienced symptoms that first manifested in her leg. But the best bit about this story is the way they wrap it up. They show House visiting her in bed after this heavy and complex heart operation, and he tells her he's got a gift for her, and he hands her a box of fried chicken. After laughing for a bit, she turns to him and asks, "Why did you fight for me? You risked so much and you hardly know me." House pauses for a bit, as if he's thinking of the answer himself, and then he says, "You're my patient. Don't screw it up." For all of House's negative, cynical traits, there is a simmering faith in humanity under all of that. He treats every human as if they're inherently selfish creatures, because he desperately wants someone to prove him wrong. I'll say this about the show's writing, it must be good, because it made me feel sympathy for a CEO. But there is another aspect of House's personality that I never see talked about. Although, watching the show today, it seems so obvious in hindsight. It was always there. And I don't think it made it in because of the actors or the characters or the network. I don't even think the writers intended for it to be there. The question is, what was going on in 2000s America that could have influenced House?
9/11.
9/11.
9/11.
9/11 changed American entertainment permanently. Because it took place over an entire day, it essentially had 24 hours of live media coverage dedicated to it. And the events themselves were pretty cinematic in nature. You couldn't make 9/11 today. You get cancelled. A lot of people point to the show 24 as the show that represented what 9/11 did to TV. I haven't seen it, but I do know a story about it that I think sums it up. In 2006, the Dean of the United States Military Academy, basically the head teacher of every soldier, flew to meet the producers of 24 and basically told them, "Hey, you need to stop torturing people on this show. I'm getting way too many people asking me why we don't torture in real life." I'll put a link to this interview in the description, because I don't think anyone's going to believe me. I wouldn't believe me, but it did happen. Whatever conclusion you want to draw from this, there's one that's pretty undeniable. 9/11 signified that TV could be a very effective way of communicating political ideas, and people were willing to stomach a lot of it. And that's not my takeaway, that's what I'm getting from Karl Rove, George Bush's senior advisor. Because in November 2001, Rove flew out to Hollywood and met with producers, major studio heads, and TV network runners, like really high up people, and he asked them, how could Hollywood help support the war on terror? Based on what they talked about, it seems like Rove was more concerned about sending messages rather than addressing what people were feeling. And House, just by the very nature of being a big American show in the 2000s, has to be unintentionally influenced by the giant cloud of Bush's administration. It was influencing everything. They flew 50 Cent out to Iraq, and Tony Yayo, and Lloyd Banks. This was a period marked by Michael Moore documentaries on how much America's government was failing, including one called Fahrenheit 9/11, a movie literally talking about how much Bush sucks ass, that's like the main point of it, that went on to be the highest grossing documentary of all time. It got beaten by Michael Jackson's This Is It. There's a paper by this guy called Kevin Ko, where he spent a whole year watching the news in the run-up to the 2004 election. Out of the 364 days he looked at, 348 brought up Iraq at least once. And just to really draw a line under this, the US election that won George Bush's second term was held on November 2nd, 2004.
Internets.
2 weeks after that, House started. There's an essay by Mike S. Dubose where he argues that instead of reading House as a procedural, it might make more sense to read it as a superhero show, where House's superpower is intelligence. Dubose goes on to say that while House's behavior is heroic, he isn't a traditional hero, and more importantly, he isn't an anti-hero either. He says House, rather than just existing as an anti-hero, is a marker of a general societal movement away from traditional concepts of rules, experts, and authority figures. Dubose points out that in the 2000s, there was a real proven trend of people year on year respecting authority less and less. One of his examples is that both George W. Bush and the United States Congress hit record low approval ratings in the 2000s. And I looked this up because I wanted to double check it, and this blows my mind. Bush still has the lowest approval rating any US president has ever had. The government, probably the biggest authority in people's lives, invaded Iraq based on a conspiracy theory that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11, and there's never been any evidence for it. And I just want to be clear, the government was actually pushing propaganda to make people believe this. In September 2003, there was a Washington Post poll that found 69% of people interviewed thought it was likely Saddam Hussein was personally involved in 9/11. So when the commission report came out, and it turned out Saddam actually had nothing to do with 9/11, yeah, obviously no one's gonna trust you. So it's fair to say that under Bush, trust in America's government was at an all-time low. Back then, anyway. So if you were wondering why there were so many violent flash games about George Bush, well, now you know. So House's constant undermining of authority wasn't just a character trait, it's much bigger than that. It was a cultural trait. And House's general ideology represented a specific slice of American consciousness in the 2000s. But House can only stand up to an authority figure if he's presented as powerful, right? And I was trying to work out how they do this, and I think I got it. Multiple times, they do give House superpowers. Like, yeah, it gets revealed to be some medical thing or it was actually a dream, but they don't show it like that, do they? In one season 1 episode, House literally changes the events of the story in front of you. And another time, they straight up show you House instant transmissioning in front of this guy. Like, yeah, they do explain it away with a rational thing, but House is still the guy in charge of the story. He's the one who controls what you see as a viewer. He's the most powerful person. If you look at the way House treats his patients in general, it starts to remind me a lot of the way the Bush administration approached the war on terror. Bush's cabinet was trying to push the message that war was the only reasonable response to terrorism. House's philosophy is essentially the ends justify the means, taken to its absolute limit. No matter what path he takes, as long as his patient recovers, House feels justified in what he's done. He has more faith in himself than anybody else. He feels like the good guy. It doesn't matter that he shot a corpse and then tried to MRI it and broke the machine, because he thinks he's the good guy. The show is pretty self-aware of this though, because anytime he does something like this, every character on the show is like, what the hell are you doing? And as the good guy, House is battling against the bad guy. An infectious bacteria that isn't capable of thinking like you and me. There's so many cultural differences. And that disease only has one goal: to kill the patient no matter what. Every episode of House is kind of a distillation of the anxieties people would have experienced around the George W. Bush administration. Now, just to be clear, I haven't said anything about if House is a good guy or a bad guy or anything about what he or what any of the people who made the show politically believe. I'm just saying, Bush's presidency clearly influenced the show. There are multiple episodes with Iraq War soldiers in them. But I will say this, House also takes drugs, hires prostitutes, and perhaps the wildest thing, has a framed photograph of Stephen Colbert in his office. So, interpret that however you want. But all of this made me start wondering. I know I've seen all of this stuff before somewhere. House is still doing cop detective stuff in every episode, but he doesn't respect authority, and he always feels justified no matter how far he goes. And somehow, all of this is to save people? I just kept thinking, I know I've seen this before somewhere. So I asked myself, if House isn't Sherlock, and I still don't really believe he is, what type of cop is he? And I think I got it. House is this type of cop.
You're a loose cannon, House! I got the DA so far up my ass, his smoke's coming out of my ears!
Is that what you do in here? You push your little papers around, and meanwhile out there an innocent man dies?
House, you're a crooked cop, but god damn it, you get results!
He's that kind of cop. House is a vigilante. He doesn't play by the rules. He's like Dirty Harry or Bad Santa. Because more than anything, what I think House M.D. actually is a fantasy. The vigilante cop movie like Dirty Harry or Death Wish is based on a pretty simple premise. People take the law into their own hands because they feel like the proper legal authorities aren't doing it for them. That style of movie did really well in the 70s because American crime rates were steadily increasing. And in the 60s, some guy's head exploded or something. But why does Dr. Gregory House, the vigilante physician, resonate with so many people? Well, if you've ever dealt with a modern healthcare system, especially in the US where House is set, you'll know they're not very fun to deal with. In fact, it's not really much of a system, is it? They're set up like isolated businesses. People generally year on year are living longer and longer lives, but they also have to deal with more chronic illnesses. And the treatments for that typically go on for an entire life. You can't just take a pill that fixes everything overnight. More than likely, you'll get bounced around from overworked doctor to overworked doctor who both have no idea what's wrong with you and no time to look into it further. The modern healthcare system is by and large failing due to greed, but people put up with it anyway because 1, the doctors want to help people, and 2, the patients don't want to die. House presents a reality where the doctor knows everything. He's the supreme powerful authority, and whether you like it or not, he's gonna take care of you. You wanted to die? Fuck that. He's gonna inject you back to life till he's done with you. He saw something that needed fixing in you, and he's not gonna rest until you're healthy again. He doesn't even care about you as a person. That's how committed to the job he is. You're his patient. He will do every single thing it takes, to the detriment of his own personal life, just to cure you. There's genuinely a lot of comfort in the idea of a doctor like that, even if it isn't very realistic. In fact, House never talks about how his patients afford all the expensive treatments and tests he keeps doing on them, unless the person is already filthy stinking rich, and therefore it isn't a problem for them. I think there's at least one obvious reason why House is still popular today. Because things suck. You might have noticed that up till this point, I've really only talked about the first half of House, and there's a good reason for that. I like it more. The first 3 seasons of House are incredible. They're some of the most creative and well-written TV I've ever seen. And this was back when every show had 24-episode seasons, so that's a lot of good TV to watch. I would recommend House to anyone who thinks it sounds interesting. The second half of the show is much harder to talk about, but it's especially difficult to talk about on the internet, because House never really gets completely awful, but it absolutely gets worse. By a lot. And I could analyze individual episodes and say this was good or that was bad, but I think that would be missing the forest for the trees.
Hop on one foot and sing the iCarly theme song.
The latter half of House goes on a downturn because of structural problems rather than any individual writing decision. I think almost every major problem the show had started in season 4, which is why I also want to say season 4 of House is one of the greatest seasons of TV ever made. And I do mean TV. A lot of people talk about film and television as if they're the exact same medium. They aren't. TV uses the same visual format as film, but there's one important difference: the way you watch it. So I want to ask you a question. Have you ever thought about how strange television actually is as a form of storytelling? Like actually is. The fact the episodes have to be a certain length to fit a time slot, for example. A sitcom has to be like 30 minutes. Do any other stories get forced to be a certain length? And then the story also needs to have natural breakpoints in it to make time for adverts to play on TV. And then seasons are also a certain amount of episodes that's been decided way in advance before making the thing. And A lot of the time, the show gets shown to people before the whole season's even finished. What it means is, everything that makes TV unique as an art form is defined around the conditions of how you watch it at home. Television is a cultural product. Just keep that in mind for a second, because I want to show you something. This is Dan Harmon, the guy who created Community and some other shit I didn't watch. What he's drawing on the board there is his way of structuring a story for a TV show. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way, or the best way, or even if it's a correct way of telling a story for TV. What I want you to focus on is the shape of what he's drawing. The story has to end up where it started, because each episode is a slice in a bigger broadcast. See, every form of storytelling is about change. Film, literature, TV, but there's a bit of an asterisk when it comes to American TV. American TV is about the illusion of change. Things can change in American TV shows, obviously. Characters can grow over time and develop into completely different people. Chase in House has an insane arc across the entire show. He goes from kissing House's ass to becoming one of the most mature and responsible doctors. But the thing about American TV is that things can't change too much. They're sort of in purgatory, because American shows aren't designed with an ending in mind. If the show is making money, it will keep going. Instead of telling a specific narrative over the course of the show, American TV is designed to give you a more general setting that you could always create more and more episodes out of. This is why adapting the procedural for American TV was such a genius idea. The characters stay the same, the way it plays out stays the same, but the execution of it is different every time. It gives you just enough familiarity to want to come back every week, while also giving you something new. This is why when people use the term filler to describe an episode of a classic American TV show, I just find it funny. The whole thing is filler. Everything between the first and last episode of a show is filler. If you don't want filler, you should be watching a movie. And that's how I see the first 3 seasons of House. They're really good bite-sized pieces of storytelling with just enough stuff going on with the characters that it's incredibly fun to watch. They give you a single story every episode, House solving the case, but then they also pepper in little arcs throughout to keep things fresh. Like when House's ex-wife enters the show. She was only in there for 9 episodes, but it added enough spice to keep the show fun. Here's how Eric Thurm described this relationship back in 2017. But unlike a serialized novel, the point of a TV show is both more and less than the sum of its parts. It is the parts. Each episode exists in relation to both the previous installments and the promise of future ones. Scripted narrative television, as we have come to know it in the past few decades, is meant to be a sort of endlessly expanding horizon, with the occasional beautiful sight in the distance or quiet moment of reflection, but with final closure just out of reach. The defining structure of the series can be stretched, tugged in several directions, and even torn slightly, but it cannot snap. So when you watch an episode of House, you are enjoying the episode by itself, but you're also getting something out of the fact the episode exists in the context of all of these other ones. You're not watching House to see how this single story about Dr. Greg gets told over 177 episodes. That would be insane and also really boring. TV has never been about the destination. It's about the journey. But the reason House was such a perfect character for this original repetitive model of TV, you know, the model that hated permanent change, is because so did House. House's whole thing was that he refused to grow as a person. He would take a couple of steps forward, then jump way the f*** back, and it felt natural because that was the type of guy he was. His character was trapped in this emotional cycle that stopped him from growing. We all know people like this. We go on Instagram like once a year to check in on them. Over the last decade and a half though, our relationship with television has changed a lot. Most of us don't even watch it on a TV anymore. And following the years since House came out, American TV has changed so much as a landscape due to streaming services that you've probably thought multiple times as I was describing this, no, that isn't true. I've definitely seen shows that do this. Stranger Things, Ozark, Sneaky Pete. But what I would say is, that's a completely different model of TV, because streaming services don't operate like the TV system that created House did. The streaming service model actually started in the 90s on a channel called Home Box Office, where its slogan was literally, "It's not TV, it's HBO." Earlier I talked about how House had a very strict formula it always stuck to, but this new model of TV, the HBO model that streaming services copied, its main defining thing was that their shows don't have a formula. That's what makes it so unique. There, Every episode is telling its own story, each with its own structure and characters to follow. No two episodes are told in the same way. That style of storytelling has always had more to do with film than TV. In fact, in the case of The Sopranos, arguably HBO's biggest and most influential show, it was originally intended to be a film. They just made more of it. And the creator of The Sopranos, David Chase, has said multiple times he thinks of each episode as a film in and of itself. What's ironic about this is that streaming services have created actual, genuine filler now, because they're all trying to do HBO, and they're bad at it. They're giving you one single story that would maybe work over a 90-minute film, maybe, but then they take it and deploy it over a full season of TV. So it gets stretched out into 8 hours, and then they have to fill the extra time with boring shit you don't care about. But here's the thing, the first 3 seasons of House were like the original model of TV, and they're fantastic. Just like Thurm says, it takes the expected structure, stretches it, tugs it in several directions, and even tears it. In fact, the best episodes of House are the ones where it starts playing around with the original formula. But the show always kept that solid base structure it could go back to. Season 4 did the one thing nobody expected. It actually changed the show. Season 4 of House is one of the greatest flexes in the history of television. See, when the first 3 seasons of House were on the air, it had a lot of viewers, but in America it was constantly competing with a different category of TV, reality shows. And as popular as House was, it was battling with American Idol, Dancing with the Stars, and Survivor for viewers. You know, shows that have a lot of natural drama in them by bringing on regular people and then turning up the temperature on them. Which is why for season 4 of House, they turned it into Survivor. I love this so much. I seriously love this. I think it's one of the best things I've ever seen. At the end of season 3, House manages to piss off his team to such a degree that Foreman, Cameron, and Chase all agree they're not going to work for him anymore. They want to move on. So what happens at the start of season 4 is that House tries to solve a case by himself. He gets stuck on the differential, solves it in the end, but the patient almost dies. Cuddy tells him he has to hire a new team, and the episode ends with House in front of 40 potential candidates for his team. Over the next few episodes, House completely whittles them down by making them play games, solving cases for him, and even elimination challenges. And after getting rid of the majority of the pack, House is left with 10 potential doctors. 1 physician gets eliminated per episode till the show's left with House's new team. And by the way, while all of this is going on, House is still doing detective doctor stuff, where he's solving 1 case per episode. It's so good. You get all the classic reality TV stuff. There's a main hub for talking to the contestants, people teaming up to betray each other, and you know the bits where people would look at a camera and say what they're thinking? That happens here, but they're presented as conversations between House and Cuddy. It's such a big swing to take, and it works unbelievably well, because you're still getting basically the show, but now there's this extra competition element, where all these doctors are trying to beat each other to the answer. It drops in this extra bit of fun while giving you the classic stuff. Another reason why it works so well, despite House obviously being fictional and not a real reality show, well, I guess they're fictional too actually, the production of this season of House was apparently similar to an episode of Survivor.
Anybody who claims they were ahead of us is lying, because literally we were shooting episodes and we didn't know who the final 3 were going to be.
You know, it became literally Survivor for us to decide who we're going to keep, because it was just, they were all good.
They were voting them off. That's how Survivor does it. That also means all of these actors had no idea if they were going to get fired or not while filming most of these episodes. It really does feel like they're trying to win a spot to stay on an incredibly popular TV show. And the whole thing is kind of an exercise in House's own ego. He loves putting people in their place, he loves telling people they're wrong, and now he has an excuse to do it. But more than that, earlier we talked about how House gets off on the idea of being wanted by other people. What House has done here is turn himself into the Bachelor. From the ABC reality show, The Bachelor. It was basically another elimination reality TV show where a group of women are competing to win the ultimate prize, a man. And in House, all of these contestants are trying to win the heart of Greg, Princeton Plainsboro's most eligible bachelor. One of the things they used to do in The Bachelor was give out roses to whoever wanted to stay on the show, and whoever didn't get one was eliminated. Seems kind of cruel in hindsight. Well, here's House doing the exact same thing. This is what makes House such a special show. It's always been self-aware of what it is, but more importantly, it knows its audience is aware of what it is. I haven't really talked about this much, but House is a show that's always been incredibly creative in how it approaches its storytelling. There are episodes that take place in House's mind as he tries to work out why he's dreaming. There's one where he's held hostage and has to cure the hostage taker, and another that's shot from the perspective of a documentary. These are just a few out of how wild it gets, but all of these rely on the viewer actually understanding what the show is referencing. It trusts its audience. One of House's main traits is that when he's being lazy and avoiding doing his job, he's usually watching soap operas, specifically medical dramas. In one episode, he kidnaps an actor from them. That's how much he likes them. In the context of the show, that's the end of the bit. But you and I know, this is actually commenting on House MD's place in TV. Soap operas are infamous for being over the top, so it's funny that House watches them because he's a real expert doctor. It's a joke only for us. Here's the thing about reality TV. Most of us watch it, I like watching Kitchen Nightmares, but we all know deep down, reality TV is terrible, right? It's like McDonald's. It'll fill you up, but it's not real food, right? As Michael Thomsen called it in 2018, it's trash TV. Later in his essay, Thomsen describes the hateful side of these shows and says, in reality TV, the story is a means of getting the character to show their personality flaws, and it can take any form it wants as long as it produces them. In other words, it's a genre designed from the ground up to try to mine people for embarrassing and vulnerable moments. But House manages to subvert this, because while it's doing a whole season dedicated to copying reality TV, Greg House is really acting much more like a teacher. Since no other doctor in the world does what he does, every case is teaching his applicants a lesson on how to think like him. Whenever they meet up to talk about who's getting eliminated or what games they're going to be competing in, it's always in a classroom with House as effectively their teacher. I'm going to be honest, I think this is the best House's character ever gets. And frankly, it's insane that it happens 70 episodes into the show. That's impressive. In the end, House picks his new team, Chris Taub, Lawrence Kuttner, and Remy Hadley, who House refuses to learn the name of and just calls a 13. But the final person to get eliminated was Dr. Amber Volakis. She's conniving, she's backstabbing, and she's House. She's so similar, in fact, that they bring her character back a couple of episodes later and have her start dating Wilson, House's best friend.
Oh my God. You're sleeping with me.
After the reality TV half of the season ends, the show slowly sinks back into the classic Case of the Week format, but ends up smashing straight into two of the best episodes of the show, the season 4 finale. It opens with House waking up in the middle of nowhere, realizing he's lost his memory, but the one thing he can't forget is he saw a life-threatening symptom someone had. So the rest of the episode is House trying to reverse engineer his memory to figure out what happened, which of course he does by taking a shitload of Alzheimer drugs. His brain's throwing up all sorts of visual metaphors for the truth, and they represent it by actually putting him physically into a completely different place. His memories presented the exact same way by the show that the real life parts are.
This is a waste of time.
I think this is sick for two main reasons. The first one is, House himself is the case he's trying to solve this week. Instead of a medical one, he's trying to find the contradictions in himself, and it's about trying to put together the events of what happened. And the other part of it is, everything you see when House is inside his own head can be read as a metaphor about himself. For example, he sees every bottle of alcohol as a generic brand saying liquor because he drinks it as a coping mechanism, not for enjoyment. Every clue that's given to him is by people who make fun of him because they know the answer and he doesn't, because not knowing something is House's greatest fear. I'm not even saying that I think this, just that they're valid ways to read his dream. Anyone can make their own while watching the episode. You know what else that means? The entire episode is now a differential diagnosis. There are a couple of other episodes where they do something similar to this, but it's never done on this scale. And by the end of the first part, House realizes part of what happened. He had been out all night drinking at a bar, had his keys taken by the bartender, and ended up on a bus with Amber. Amber was the person he couldn't remember. And as they were riding it, the bus had a fatal crash, and nobody's seen Amber since. Her ID gets lost because of everything going flying, but they find her unnamed at a local hospital, and transfer her over to PPTH. She's suffering major injuries from the bus crash, but there's something else wrong as well. That's when the second half of the finale takes place. House is still trying to diagnose his memory, and if he doesn't get the answer, Amber's going to die. The hospital's throwing as many resources as it can to try get the answer. They even give Amber her own private room. It's just down to House now. But there's a major problem. House is compromised. Both him and Wilson are too close to the patient and they're not exercising proper judgment. Plus, the only clue they've managed to put together is that Amber had the flu. Not really that helpful, especially when it's not the condition that's killing her. As he's trying to work it out, House falls asleep and has a dream that Amber was meeting him to have an affair. And he feels genuinely so much Christian guilt over it that he tries to get approval to shock his brain with electricity. It's a red herring though. It turns out when House was drinking, he tried to call Wilson for a ride home, but Amber picked up and came to get him instead because Wilson was on call at the hospital. House does what House does best and gets her to have one drink with him before they leave, and that's how they ended up on the bus together. But as he's remembering this, House's posture changes. He straightens up, and for the first time in 90 minutes, he seems focused. Everything slows to a crawl, he starts disassociating between the dream and real life, and he realizes Amber had been taking a pill for her flu, amantadine. At this point, Wilson takes over and starts putting the clues together himself. The crash destroyed her kidneys, her body couldn't filter the amantadine out, so she's suffering from poisoning. The solution's dialysis. Flush the drugs out, she'll be fine. But House is resigned during all of this and lets Wilson continue uninterrupted because he knows the truth. Amantadine binds with proteins. It's attached itself to her organs. There is no cure. Wilson goes to wake her up hours before her death and says goodbye to her one final time, then tells her the truth. A single pill slowly killed Amber, and House was the one responsible. It's an important moment for House's character because up till this point, House had always been dealing with his addiction in horrible ways, but it didn't matter ultimately because he could still do his job. But it finally exploded in his face and ended up permanently hurting the one person he cares the most for. That's how season 4 ends. There's no resolution and House's future is just left up in the air. Think about this though. If you were a producer on the show, where do you go from here? After season 4, House, the main draw of your show, really only has two options. He either has to fall deeper into his addictions and flaws as a character, or he has to try and make serious changes so this doesn't happen again. But as you're thinking about that, think about this as well. Neither of the options I just said would go back to the original formula. They sort of try every option. Season 5 is about House getting worse, Season 6 is about him going to rehab, and then they just kind of give up for the last two. The first 3 seasons worked so well because House was continuously just on the line between mishandling his addictions and helping people. But here, by making one of the best seasons of TV ever, they accidentally painted themselves into a corner. House started changing things permanently, and now they can't go back. They finally snapped the formula of the show clean in half. After season 4, there's a noticeable shift in what the show's interested in. The procedural stuff is still there and it's great, but there's a much bigger emphasis on the characters' personal lives. Probably because there had to be now. And while I think the show is pretty decent at it, the larger problem is that investigating the case takes a backseat to whatever character thing they want to do. And I'm sorry, Foreman is just not that interesting. The guy's whole thing is that he's boring. Like he's supposed to be the boring one out of the group. Rather than weaving the two halves of the show into each other, it becomes more divided. It's like they've started repelling each other like a colloid. I'm not a scientist. The first episode of season 5 is weird. Like, really weird. They barely talk about the case, and most of the episode is about House and Wilson's relationship, which is fine, I guess, but it's especially strange because now the show has essentially turned into those soap operas House used to watch. I think it's because the writers had realized what they had done. They had accidentally given the show baggage. Now, every time anything happens on the show, it has the weight of Amber's death weighing on it. Every future decision House makes is now being considered in the aftermath that he killed Amber, the love of Wilson's life. The first 4 seasons of House worked because while it was obvious it was a highly formulaic show, it hit it enough that you could still believe in the illusion. It's like a magic trick. It loses something once you know how it's done. Once Amber died, it became nakedly clear that the show was just trying to manipulate you. Oh, House is getting worse. Oh, his addiction's going too far. But it's difficult to buy into any of it when you can see the writer's hands desperately trying to pull some emotion out of you. You know that House is just gonna get better and not learn anything. The show has to keep going. The worst episode of the show, I think, by far, is season 7, episode 5. Where House is babysitting Cuddy's daughter, and he thinks she ate a dime when he wasn't looking, so he calls Wilson to come over, and they get into wacky hijinks trying to get the dime out before Cuddy gets home. This is awful. I don't know what this is, but it isn't House. Actually, I do know what it is. It's Drake and Josh. It's the episode where the parents go out of town and then they rent their house to a bunch of people, and they're like, oh, let's call it the Drake and Josh Inn. And then the parents see it on the news and they're like, wait, what's happening? Is that Helen? Helen's Josh's manager at the premiere, by the way. The premiere is the cinema Josh works at. And Josh gets a job at the premiere because he makes Crazy Steve quit. I know you want me to go back to talking about that episode of House, but I'd really rather talk about Drake and Josh right now. I can't believe I brought up a Dan Schneider show. I'm already trying to avoid talking about Brian Singh. Season 8 of House is disliked by a lot of people, because by this point, the show has changed drastically. Most characters have left. Cuddy, Cameron, 13, Kuttner, some other character I never even talked about who gets introduced in season 7. But I think it's actually one of the better seasons in the back half of the show, because it's the only one that was willing to permanently change up the formula. It adds a couple of new members, and the new team isn't really trying to even be like the old team. It isn't as good as the classic seasons, but it's still attempting to forge a different identity. It was just too late. From season 5 till the end, the biggest issue by far is that House loses the identity it spent 4 seasons building. It looks like House got an official Facebook page at the end of season 4 as well, which seems to be symbolic of the final nail in the coffin, honestly. Hey, you want to play Farmville but it's in a hospital? It's the best premise ever.
Play now on Facebook.
The show still has fantastic filmmaking, the writing is better than most shows, and the occasional really good episode does manage to sneak in. But I think it says a lot that the most successful episodes of the show after this point are the ones that have minimal baggage, like the one that follows Chase instead as he questions if he should be a doctor or not, or the one that takes place entirely in jail as House tries to avoid being killed by a prison gang. Sorry, I just realized how insane that sounds with no context. I think the moment I realized House had gone off the rails was when they introduced this guy. Now if you've seen House, you might be wondering, who the fuck is that? That's a good question. Did you know House had webisodes? If you don't know what a webisode is, basically, before TV channels realized they could just dump clips of their shows on YouTube, they would make exclusive content you could only watch by going to their website or something. House's webisodes were available on an app called In-House, and In-House had like scripts of episodes you could read and like music from the show. Actually, this is pretty cool, they should do stuff like this again. Webisodes were typically short though, like 2 minutes for each one, and they'd usually make like 10 and run the whole web series alongside the main show. It was a pretty effective way to keep people talking about your show when it stopped being on the air. And that's how House MD ended up with Nurse Jeffrey, this fake vlog about a nurse who tries to cancel House by filming and interviewing other people. Of course, you never see House's face in this, or his voice, just his leg, and that's definitely Hugh Laurie's leg. You might notice the quality of these is a bit deep fried. That's because this series was only archived because House fan accounts re-uploaded the videos 14 years ago. I couldn't find a single trace of this anywhere else. Now, in the grand scheme of things, Nurse Jeffrey is not a big deal, but it does kind of represent what happened to House. It went from being this countercultural show, commenting on what was popular and taking aim at authority, to just culture. The ironic thing is, by trying so hard to be unpredictable, House became predictable. You want to play a game you can never win? Try the cafeteria at Princeton Plainsboro. Here's a better idea. Play the differential diagnosis bonus game on my slot machine at Double Down Casino. New players get 1 million free. Dr. House. Super acteur. Nurse Jeffrey is shite, by the way.
House jerked off in this chair?
Over the course of this video, we've talked about a bunch of different ways you can watch House. As a procedural, as a medical drama, in the shadow of George Bush's presidency, at one point even as a reality show. But today, House exists in the same genre as all TV. A single thumbnail that's been buried in an ocean of stories for you to scroll by. It didn't matter that House was on the air for just under a decade and was immensely popular. It didn't end in some big explosion either. It just sort of ran out of steam and slowly died. Now it's been reduced for most people to purely a JPEG. Couldn't even spring for PNG. What strikes me the most about watching House now is that TV used to exist in a wider conversation.
Amongst the Emmys. Ooh, what a feather in your cap.
Almost every aspect of House was formatted around the way someone would have engaged with television as a culture. Its acts were based on commercial breaks. It was constantly referencing whatever else was on TV. Television today exists in only 2 categories: prestige big drama shows that run for a couple of episodes a season, or trash TV that appeals to as many people as possible. Where have all the shows in between gone? We now live in an entertainment landscape where taking risks is considered a bad thing. Most shows are designed to oxidize immediately upon release and get forgotten within the week they came out. There are 7 Walking Dead spin-offs. They rebooted Frasier and couldn't even get Niles back. House could only exist because it wasn't made in the current system of streaming service produced television. And what kills me is that its format is now considered so safe that they tried to rip off House within the last year. Twice. I didn't even talk about the one with Zachary Quinto. There was a great article that came out a couple months ago called Casual Viewing, written by Will Tavlin. The whole thing is worth reading, but I want to point out a specific section. Several screenwriters who have worked for Netflix told me a common note from company executives is have this character announce what they're doing so that viewers who have this program on in the background can follow along. Imagine trying to apply this to House. To put it bluntly, the show would be fucked. So much of it is built on not explaining things to the viewer and having faith in the audience. Gregory House literally does the opposite of walking into a room and describing what he's doing. Even the robot devil from Futurama knew not to do that. Now, I'm not saying you have to 100% focus on every single thing you watch, but the shows should at least be trying to get you to do that. I guess the reality is, some shows aren't designed as entertainment anymore. They're designed as content. Streaming services don't want you to spend time thinking about what you watched. They just want you to binge it. And then when you're done, binge something else. We live in the slop era. Now, I am confident streaming services will collapse sometime in the future. In fact, it might have already started. We will get back to making good TV eventually. It's just that time is not right now. But House exists in a pretty unique place. While the deck is clearly stacked against it in so many ways, it seems to have entered popular culture again in a way nobody could have really predicted. It feels like for the first time in ages, people are talking about House again. And the reason seems to be that it got added to fucking Netflix? It's tempting to be cynical about that, but I actually think it's kind of hopeful. Television has always been a cultural product, first and foremost. It says just as much about the audience that's watching it. Even if the quality of brand new TV is starting to decline, I find it pretty reassuring that people's standards haven't. We can still recognize something good when we see it. I think the fact a show as creative, unique, and willing to take risks as House is now being revived again years later is amazing. And I'm glad it means House gets to be remembered for what it did well, rather than what it didn't. When I look at House today, you know what I see? I see that underneath the numbers and data and algorithms, there was really only one reason why people liked House. Because of how it made them feel. Any attempt to quantify emotions like anger, joy, and sorrow so that they can be imitated and recreated like some scientific experiment, that will always fail. Those feelings only mean something because of the risk that was taken to create them. The irony is not lost on me that House was a show about a man who always took the risky path instead of the sensible, boring option, and millions of people loved him for it. How long is it going to take television to relearn that same lesson? Yo, it's Jay. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and you'd like to help support me making more weird stuff like it, check out patreon.com/lowercasej. Even $1 goes a long way. This was the most time and effort I've put into a video to date, and I just wanted to say thank you to the patrons for letting me do that. I'd like to especially thank Akira Game Dev, Big Lou, Descanny Man, Joshua Austin, Liv, Manav Care, Mox Bagel, New Church, Ravi Dosanjh, The Fragrance of Dark Coffee, and Vague Type. Thank you so much. By the way, did you know there's a direct connection between Takeshi Kitano and House M.D? And it's Omar Epps.